The question that dismantled Dr. Lena Vasquez's career arrived on a Thursday afternoon, spoken by a 19-year-old student who had not yet learned which questions were forbidden. She had been teaching an introductory course on transit mechanics at the University of Cologne, explaining the principles behind the fold drive, the propulsion technology gifted to humanity by the Verith Conclave when first contact was established 152 years prior. The standard lesson, the standard answers. Then the student raised his hand and asked why the fold drive operated at precisely 7 light-years per day, and whether that limit was actually a physical constraint or simply a characteristic of the specific design humanity had received. Lena gave him the standard answer. Later that night, alone in her office with a mug of cold tea, she started checking. By morning, she understood that the boy had stumbled onto something the conclave had spent 20,000 years hoping no one would notice. The drive limit was not physics. It was architecture. Now, 17 years later, Lena stood at the primary viewport of Time's Copernicus station, a research installation embedded in the ice of a distant Kuiper analog object, so unremarkable that the conclave's monitoring network had never bothered to name it. She was 61 years old, her hair silver, her hands steady despite everything that had brought her here. Behind her, 11 scientists waited in silence while the computers finished their final verification pass. "That's 39 checks," said Dr. Amara Ozzy from her station. She was Lena's propulsion theorist, a woman who had once held an endowed chair on the Titan Polytechnic faculty and had abandoned it without a backward glance. "The model holds every time." "Run it 40, Lena said. No one argued. They understood. What they had built, what they were about to test, was not an improvement on the fold drive. It was a different thing entirely, built from entirely different principles. The fold drive punched temporary corridors through subquantum foam, and the speed limit existed because faster transit created detectable resonance waves that propagated outward through that foam, visible to sensor arrays across interstellar distances. Every ship in the galaxy left a readable signature, every course could be reconstructed, every destination could be inferred. The conclave had not built a transportation system. They had built a surveillance network that also moved cargo. Lena's team had gone another direction. Quantum coherence bridging did not touch the foam at all. It established a phase-linked corridor between 2 points in normal spacetime by exploiting a property of entangled vacuum states that the conclave's own theorists had documented once, 3,000 years ago, and then quietly stopped publishing about. The energy cost was severe at initiation and negligible thereafter. The detection signature was limited to a brief gravitational chirp at both the origin and destination, unmistakable in isolation, but carrying no transit data, no trajectory, no speed information. Anyone watching would know something had moved. They would have no idea where it had gone. The test vessel was a 40-meter utility frame they had repurposed over 4 years of careful work. Its crew of 2 had volunteered, knowing the risk calculations placed survival odds somewhere between encouraging and please update your next of kin records. 40 checks complete, Amara said. Model is stable, all parameters confirmed. Lena turned from the viewport. Open a channel to the Times Meridian. The face of Commander Yusuf Ibarra appeared on the display, calm, prepared, the particular stillness of a person who has made peace with uncertainty. Beside him, his co-pilot, Lieutenant Sujin Kwan, was running final console checks without looking up. "Copernicus Station," Ibarra said. "We are green across all boards, awaiting your authorization, Dr. Vasquez." Lena thought about her daughter, who was 7 years old and had recently announced that she wanted to be an explorer. In the current galactic order, that ambition had a ceiling. She could haul freight along conclave-approved corridors. She could apply, through the appropriate diplomatic channels, for a surveying license that would allow her to examine pre-screened systems in designated zones. She would navigate a galaxy with 1,000 wonders and be permitted to approach a narrow selection of them, because the rest were controlled by species who had arrived earlier and written the rules accordingly. "Commander Ibarra," Lena said, "you are authorized to initiate bridge formation. Please make history." "Understood." A pause. "It's been an honor, Doctor. Come back. That's the plan." The Meridian Times disengaged from its docking cradle and moved to the designated test coordinates, a region of clear space 40,000 kilometers from the station. Lena watched it go and felt, surprisingly, very little. The fear had been present for years. It had long since become background noise. The target was a red subdwarf 38,000 light-years away, selected because it had no inhabited systems within sensor range and because its precise coordinates had been quietly obtained from a conclave star catalog through channels that were technically legal and practically absurd. "Bridge generator charging," said Dr. Priya Mehta, "the team's energy systems lead." The countdown was not dramatic. There was no countdown, actually just Ibarra's voice over the channel, steady and professional, calling out the activation sequence as he ran it. And then the Meridian Times, was not there. The space it had occupied looked exactly like any other space. The ship was simply gone. In the silence that followed, Lena became aware that no one in the room was breathing. 11 seconds later, every gravitational sensor on the station fired simultaneously. "Spatial return signature," Amara said, her voice entirely unlike her normal voice. "Origin coordinates, that's them." The Meridian Times appeared, hull intact, running lights normal. The docking transponder chirped its routine hello. Ibarra's voice arrived before anyone had thought to open the channel. "Copernicus Station, this is Times Meridian, confirming successful transit to target coordinates and return. Total elapsed time, 11.4 seconds. He stopped. When he continued, the professional steadiness had developed a crack in it. "We could see the core from there, Doctor. The whole galactic center, just hanging there." Another pause. "I didn't think it would feel like that." Amara was crying. She was doing it quietly, without apparent awareness that she was doing it, still reading data off her display as tears ran down her face. "Doctor." Reyes, the youngest member of the team, had his forehead down on his console and his shoulders were shaking. Several people were simply standing, doing nothing, in the way of people who have prepared for a moment for years, and find, at its arrival, that preparation is inadequate. Lena looked out the viewport at the unremarkable darkness where the Meridian Times had been and was again. She felt the weight of what the gravitational pulses had already announced to the galaxy. Not the what, not the where, but the fact of it. Something had happened here that sensor networks from one end of known space to the other had registered and flagged and begun routing toward analysts who would have questions. She reached for the secure uplink to Earth Command. "This is Copernicus Station. Test successful. Begin diplomatic pre-positioning. We have perhaps 30 hours before the inquiries start arriving." The response came from Admiral Dara Nakemdarim, commander of the Unified Earth Fleet. She looked like someone who had been awake for 2 days, which was accurate. "Confirmed, Doctor." "Outstanding work. Ambassador Calloway is already aboard the transit shuttle. Everything changes now." "Yes," Lena agreed, watching the stars. "Let's make sure we're ready for what that means." The conclave deliberation nexus occupied a space station so ancient that its original construction date was listed in official records as disputed. It was not disputed. The conclave simply preferred that the number remain vague because the number made the station older than several of its member civilizations. Ambassador Felix Calloway had visited twice before in an official capacity, and both times had felt the intended effect, the slow, careful pressure of accumulated history, designed to remind visitors that they were new and the conclave was not. Holographic monuments traced the great achievements of galactic governance. Corridors wide enough for species 3 meters tall bore plaques commemorating the Accord of Kethis, the resolution of the Third Expansion, the long peace that had followed the Convergence catastrophe 29 centuries ago. Today, Calloway walked through those corridors accompanied by a 6-member conclave security detail and felt nothing in particular about the monuments. He had done a great deal of reading in the past 48 hours, and what he had read had changed how he looked at commemorative plaques. The chamber where the conclave held emergency sessions was a sphere 500 meters across, its transparent walls looking out into the intergalactic dark. Platforms at varying heights held representatives of 71 species. The density of alien attention as Calloway's platform rose toward the center of the room was a physical sensation, like pressure. The presiding voice for this cycle was Counselor Marathesh of the Dovari, an ancient people who served as the conclave's institutional historians and took considerable pride in having witnessed more of galactic history than almost anyone else. Marathesh was tall, their body a slow-moving arrangement of bioluminescent segments, and when they spoke, the chamber's acoustics carried every syllable without amplification. Ambassador Felix Calloway, you stand before the deliberation nexus to account for events originating in your system 41 hours ago. Analysis confirms a gravitational signature consistent with propulsion technology beyond what humanity's treaty allowances permit. Testimony is required. Calloway had prepared for weeks, in a variety of scenarios, for exactly this moment. He found, standing in it, that the preparation had been useful. Counselor Marathesh, honored representatives. I'm here to inform you of a development, not to offer a defense. He paused to allow the translation systems to complete their cycle across 71 species. Humanity has developed a transit system we call coherence bridging. It functions on principles distinct from full drive technology. A vessel using coherence bridging can traverse the full diameter of the galaxy in under 30 seconds. We have tested this capability. It works. The chamber did not erupt so much as it fractured dozens of simultaneous conversations, representatives turning to each other, emergency channels lighting up. At least 3 species whose communication required physical contact, beginning what appeared to be rapid emergency consultations with their own appendages. Marathesh raised a segmented limb. The chamber's luminescent walls pulsed once, and the noise subsided into a rigid, charged quiet. You admit to violating the technology accord. I admit to developing technology beyond what the technology accord permits, Calloway said. I would suggest those are meaningfully different statements. The accord exists to prevent any species from acquiring capabilities that would allow them to challenge the conclave's institutional authority. We've demonstrated that the accord's restrictions were not in fact based in physical law, they were based in deliberate design. The full drive you provided us was engineered to be monitorable. The speed limit is a sensor network feature. We built something that isn't bound by those constraints, because nothing in the actual physics requires them to exist. A voice cut through military liaison Commander Vorthan of the Zenshi hegemony, whose people staffed the conclave's primary enforcement arm, and who had clearly had a difficult 41 hours. You're describing what you did as though it requires no justification. You violated agreements your government signed. We signed agreements that were offered under conditions that aren't usually described as negotiation. We were brought into the galactic community with the understanding that we would remain at its margins indefinitely. Trade structures that favor established powers by a ratio our economists find depressing to calculate. Territorial designations that ensure human colonies will never access resource-rich systems. A transit technology specifically designed so that our movements could be tracked at all times. Calloway kept his voice level. The accord kept us contained. We've stopped being containable. Representative Doulamaris of the Sereth Commercial Compact spoke from a platform to his left. The structures you're describing exist to maintain stability. The convergence catastrophe killed 3 billion people across 40 worlds. The systems that evolved from that event have kept significant warfare out of known space for nearly 3,000 years. Then let's build systems that actually do that, openly and by consent, Calloway replied. rather than systems that do that incidentally while primarily functioning to ensure that no newcomer ever catches up. I'm not opposed to galactic stability. I'm opposed to it being achieved at humanity's expense, without our meaningful agreement, using technology that was designed to be unimprovable. He touched the control on his wrist. The chamber's central display shifted to a star map, the full galaxy, rendered in the blue-white detail of a conclave survey chart. Points of red marked the major population centers, the industrial hubs, the military installations. He had borrowed the design from a briefing Admiral Kemderem had shown him, and he had wrestled with using it, because it was not a subtle gesture. He had decided that subtlety had had its opportunity. Green lines appeared, connecting a point in the Orion spur where Earth was to every red mark simultaneously. Under coherence bridging, these transit times are identical. Seconds, with no detectable transit signature. He let that sit for a moment. I want to be very clear that I am not threatening anyone. I'm describing our capabilities so that everyone in this room can assess the new situation accurately. Humanity doesn't want conflict. We want to renegotiate our position in the galactic order from a basis of actual parity. The room had gone quiet, in the way rooms go quiet when people are doing rapid arithmetic. Calloway continued. We're asking for 3 things. First, the technology accord is dissolved. It was a control mechanism, and control mechanisms require the consent of the controlled. You don't have ours anymore. Second, every trade agreement between Earth and conclave-affiliated species is reopened on equal terms. We signed those agreements before we had any leverage. They don't reflect our actual value to the galactic economy, and everyone in this room knows it. Third, human colonial systems receive full sovereignty, including unrestricted resource rights. No more extraction limits designed to prevent us from building an independent industrial base. These demands would restructure the entire framework of galactic governance, Marathesh said. Their bioluminescent segments had dimmed somewhat. You're asking for changes that would affect every species and every agreement across 20,000 years of established order. Yes, Calloway said, I am, because that order was built by the species that were already powerful for the benefit of the species that were already powerful. We're offering you a chance to rebuild it as something that works for everyone. That offer is genuinely meant, but it won't be available indefinitely. The Chamber's alert system overrode everything, a priority signal reserved for events significant enough to interrupt proceedings. The central display shifted. 3 new contacts had appeared in the space around the Nexus, emerging simultaneously. Their transponders broadcasting Earth identification codes. The transit vessels, Times Endurance, Resolute, and Times New Horizon Times, had jumped from positions on 3 separate sides of the galaxy and arrived in the same instant with the kind of coordination that made a point without requiring words. Commander Vorthon's voice was very controlled. Those vessels are in prohibited space. Those vessels are unarmed and will not move unless fired upon, Calloway said. They're demonstrating that the test was not an isolated event. We have the technology. We have the manufacturing capacity to scale it. And we have people who remember being told that certain destinations were not for them. He looked around the sphere, meeting whatever passed for eyes across a variety of biologies. We're not asking permission anymore. We're asking for partnership. The difference matters. I hope this council chooses to understand that distinction before it chooses any other response. Marathesh was quiet for a long moment. When they spoke, their voice had the particular weight of an institution recognizing, for the first time, that it is no longer the largest thing in the room. The conclave will deliberate. You are dismissed, Ambassador. Calloway's platform descended. Around him, the sphere fractured into urgent conversation, alliances forming, calculations being made, species that had not spoken directly to each other in centuries suddenly finding they had things to discuss. Some would choose hostility, some would choose negotiation. A few, the ones paying attention, would understand that the only real choice remaining was how gracefully to adapt. He met his security attaché at the base of the chamber. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has just watched a person do something extremely inadvisable and is reserving judgment on whether it was also brave. "The shuttle is ready," she said. "Good," he walked. After a moment, "How do you think that went?" She considered. "I think you said true things. I think true things are sometimes more dangerous than false ones." "Probably." He looked back. Once, at the chamber entrance at the corridor beyond, with its monuments to 20,000 years of order. "Let's go home." On a research station buried in the ice of a nameless object at the solar system's edge, Doctor. Lena Vasquez watched the delayed transmission of Calloway's address to the conclave and felt something complicated and difficult to name. She had given 17 years to this. She had been mocked, professionally erased, and told in terms both polite and otherwise that she was chasing a fantasy. She had watched colleagues who had chosen easier paths receive awards at ceremonies she was no longer invited to attend. She had done the math 40 times and been right 40 times and been told, each time, that being right was insufficient. Now, she had been right in a way that the galaxy could not ignore. She did not feel triumphant. She felt the weight of what came next, the negotiations that would stretch for years, the species that would choose retaliation, the long, unsteady work of building something new out of the rubble of something old. She felt the specific anxiety of a person who has started a process they cannot stop, which is different from regret but occupies some of the same space. She thought about her daughter. She thought about the stars visible through the viewport, not many, this deep in the outer system, but enough to see by. Humanity had not asked for permission to understand physics. They had not submitted the correct forms in triplicate before asking inconvenient questions. They had looked at a speed limit and asked why, and the answer had been times, because we built it that way, and they had built something different. The conclave had held the galaxy's attention for 20 millennia through the accumulated weight of institutions, through controlled technology and careful dependency, and the sheer exhaustion of challenging something so old and so large. It had been, in its way, a remarkable achievement. It was no longer sufficient. Lena looked out at the stars and thought, "We are going to make so many mistakes." The thought was clarifying rather than paralyzing because behind it was another thought, quieter and more certain. "We are going to make them as ourselves." She activated the channel to Earth Command. "This is Copernicus Station. Stand by for full mission debrief." A pause. "Tell the shipyards to proceed." "We're going to need more ships than we planned."